talking about being in these trenches, which obviously all these soldiers spent an immense amount of time. They lived in these trenches. Back to the book. The desolation and the profound silence, sporadically broken by the crump of shells, were heightened by the sorry impression of devastation. Ripped haversacks, broken rifles, scraps of cloth, counterpointed grotesquely with children's toys, shell fuses, deep craters from explosions, bottles, harvest implements, shredded books, battered household gear, holes whose gaping darkness betrayed the presence of basements where the bodies of unlucky inhabitants of the houses were gnawed by the particularly assiduous swarms of rats. In the cattle byres and stables and barns, the bones of livestock still dangling from their chains, trenches dug through ravaged gardens, in among sprouting bulbs of onions, wormwood, rhubarb, narcissus, buried under weeds. On the neighboring fields, grain barns, through whose roofs the grain was already sprouting. All that with half-buried communication trench running through it. And all suffused with the smell of burning and decay. Sad thoughts are apt to sneak up on the warrior in such a locale when he thinks of those who only recently led their lives in tranquility. So he's actually providing a little caution to people, a little caution to the warriors that when you see, these babies' toys and this normal village that's been ripped and now has trenches running through it, and you can't let that sneak up on you, he says, that emotion. You've got to detach yourself from that. And speaking of the rats, here he says, they are repellent creatures, and I'm always thinking of the secret desecrations they perform on the bodies in the village basements. Once, as I was striding through the ruins of Monkey on a warm night, they came oozing out of their hiding places in such undescribable numbers that the ground was like a long carpet of them, patterned with the occasional white of an albino. So many rats. First of all, so many rats that it looks like a carpet, and so many rats that there's actually a regular occurrence of albino rats. Yeah. That's a lot of rats. And talking about life in the trench, we're real Renaissance, back to the book, we're real Renaissance men who can turn our hands to anything, and the trenches make their 1,000-fold demands on us every day. We sink deep shafts, construct dugouts and concrete pillboxes, rig up wire entanglements, divine drainage systems. Revet, support, level, raise and smooth, fill in latrines. In a word, we do all possible tasks ourselves. So these guys are in the business of constructing their house, constructing the trenches that they live in. They live in these dugouts, which is like a lower part of the trench where they dig in. They build all this stuff themselves, and that's what they do. And then in the middle of that, back to the book, a sentry collapses, streaming blood, shot in the head. His comrades rip the bandage roll out of his tunic and get him bandaged up. There's no point, Bill. Come on, he's still breathing, isn't he? Then the stretcher's bearers come along to carry him to the dressing station. The stretcher poles collide with the corners of the fire bays. No sooner has the man disappeared than everything is back to the way it was before. Someone spreads a few shovelfuls of earth over the red puddle, and everyone goes back to whatever he was doing. Only a new recruit maybe leans against the revetment, looking a little green about the gills. He's endeavoring to put it all together. Such an incredibly brutal assault, so sudden, with no warning given. It can't be possible. It can't be real. Poor fellow. If only you knew what was in store for you. (7 October 1915). Standing at dawn on the fire step opposite our dugout next to the sentry when a rifle bullet ripped through his forage cap without harming a hair on his head. At the same time, 2 pioneers were wounded on the wires. One had a ricochet shot through both legs, the other a ball through his ear. In the morning, the sentry out on our flank was shot through both cheekbones. The blood spurted out of him in thick gouts. And to cap it all, when Lieutenant Von Ewald, visiting our sector to take pictures of Sap N, barely 50 yards away, turned to climb down from the outlook, a bullet shattered the back of his skull and he died on the spot. Large fragments of skull were left littering the sentry platform. Also, a man was hit in the shoulder, but not badly. The middle of the platoon section of trench was attacked with 6-inch shells. One man was hurled against a post by the blast so hard he sustained serious internal injuries, and a splinter of wood punctured the artery in his arm. That night, 2 men were wounded while unspooling wire. Gut Schmidt was shot in both hands and one thigh, and Schaefer took a bullet in the knee. Following a torrential downpour in the night, all the traverses came down and formed a gray, sludgy porridge with the rain, turning the trench into a deep swamp. Our only consolation was that the British were just as badly off as we were, because we could see them bailing out for all they were worth. Since our position has a little more elevation than theirs, we even managed to pump our excess their way. So here it is. They're almost face to face with the British. They're getting a downpour of rain, and they take a little satisfaction in the fact that they can actually funnel some of the water into the British trench. That's how close they are. The crumbled trench walls expose a line of bodies left there from the previous autumn's fighting. I was standing next to Territorial Wiegmann in front of the Altenburg redoubt when a long shot passed through his bayonet, which he was carrying over his shoulder, and gave him a bad wound in the groin. So this is kind of the daily life that he talks about, being stuck in these trenches. And it's just brutal. It's brutal, and you can kind of get the matter-of-factness that he delivers so much of this with. It's like, oh, this guy was shot, this guy was shot, this guy had his leg blown off. It's just like boom, 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 boom.
You know, when he mentions how he noticed someone else reacting to that, when meanwhile it's just real matter-of-fact to him, but
right.
Just the other guy reacting to it stands out. You know, that's how matter-of-fact it is.